This is the eLearning Podcast, episode number 15.
My advice has always been the first time someone says, I want to use this tool, because they see something and it's really cool at a conference or somewhere else. And they say, I want to use this. And I always say, take a step back. What is it you want your students to be able to do? And I think that if you don't start with that question, then you can end up going down a road, almost down a rabbit hole of just taking things because it looks cool, but it doesn't add value to the education.
Welcome to the eLearning Podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest for today's episode is Lianne Keiller, a physiotherapist turned technologist who's now the IT manager for one of the largest universities in Cape Town, South Africa. In this fantastic conversation, we talk about almost everything involved in delivery of a successful e-learning experience for a very diverse community of over 25,000 students. From the LMS choice to the lobbying that allowed them to provide laptops and zero-rated access to Moodle, to the unprecedented levels of student stress and anxiety that led to the improvement of digital services support and the mobile learning experience, you'll definitely find Lianne's stories fascinating and maybe even relatable. In this conversation, we talk about what's it like to work at Stellenbosch University, a public research institution, the oldest in South Africa, and what it means to be previously privileged in a university setting. How the pandemic did not disrupt the school year for South African students, but it turned out to be a trial by fire for IT administrators. We also talk about the community engagement-based strategies that allowed the team led by Lianne to provide comprehensive technological solutions to a vast community, even at times of record stress and anxiety levels among students. We also talk about the organic upbringing of Lianne surrounded by tech, including an early cell phone adopter parent, a lifelong familiarity with all kinds of tech, and her final transition from the medical field into a full-time tech manager. And finally, we talk about Lianne's thoughts on budget-proof tech and a curriculum that's able to adapt to what students have access to and are comfortable with. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Lianne. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you very much. We're coming in live, 5 by 5, as they say in the amateur radio world. Where do we find you sitting right now?
I'm in Cape Town, South Africa.
Fantastic. And are you in your office? Are you in your home?
I'm in my bedroom. My new office.
We couldn't tell. We wouldn't know. It's all right. Don't worry. So you're in your bedroom. You are the manager for learning technologies at a university called Stellenbosch University. Let me botch that name one more time. Introduce yourself to us. Tell us about what that means to be the manager for learning technologies. Tell us about Stellenbosch, what kind of university, size, those kinds of things.
Well, we are a public university, state university, one of many in the country. And we have about 20,000 undergrads, a couple more thousand postgrads, and about 3,000 to 5,000 staff. And so we are a previously privileged. In South Africa, you hear a lot about previously disadvantaged.
Oh, interesting. Previously privileged.
Yeah.
I never heard that. Unpack that one for me. What does that mean?
So you have almost traditionally what was the white Afrikaans universities, and you had white English universities, and Stellenbosch was one of the Afrikaans ones. We are now a multilingual university, but we have 3 campuses, with one rural campus as well for the health sciences. We have 10 faculties with all the disciplines that you can think of. One of them including the military academy. So our National Defense Force has the formal training as well that happens at one of our campuses. And We are a very busy, very active university, research-led, but the undergraduate programs obviously are where I spend most of my time.
Mm. That is, I mean, the diversity between a military academy and medical research and,
Yeah.
just biology 101. I mean, that is a lot to handle.
Yeah.
We're recording this just for posterity, early September 2nd in 2020.
Yes.
What's your COVID experience like right now? I mean, and maybe give us a little history and then like what's it feel like right now?
Yeah, so in South Africa, our academic year runs with the calendar year. So we start in January and we end in December, which meant that we were kind of right at the end of our first term when lockdown hit in the country. So we started planning kind of a business continuity early March, once our first case had come into the country. And we shut down, well, the whole country shut down really at the end of March. And we have been working remotely since then. We've been very, very lucky, I think, if I look at the rest of the country, where our students have been fully online from the get-go. And we went through our first full exams, everything run on Moodle
Wow.
in May, June, which was a trial by fire. I can say that.
I'm sure
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
So we are now in our third term of the year, and seem to be learning as we go along. Definitely some of the kind of 3-year plans have kind of become 3-month plans. And so we've had to do quite a bit of adjustment and upskilling of many of the staff, but we have a very small team. So in IT, we have academic IT, under which I fall, the learning technology systems. And then we have partners that we work with in the academic environment. And I think that's one of the strengths in terms of how we do things at Stellenbosch, is that we work in collaboration with the academic side. So your faculty development, your end user support and training are sitting in another department outside of IT. And then within IT, I then fulfill a role of project and relationship management between the different IT services that the academic environment would require.
Perfect. So you're the conduit. You're the one who translates, you translate tech to academic and academic to tech, essentially, right?
Exactly that.
I love that position, the connector.
Yes.
Super cool. So is there any, I have 2 follow-on questions there. Is there any relief in sight? Where does, is Stellenbosch preparing to maybe even go to a blended or come back on campus, or is that still just not even in the cards?
So we always had a bit of a blend, but it was more in the postgraduate programs. And the country's regulations have been that up until, I think probably about a week ago, we were allowed 1/3 of students back on campus. So those were mainly the final year students in some programs, especially those who needed to be in the labs, your medical students as well. Final year students went back fairly early. And then about a week ago, they said, okay, 2/3. But at this stage, obviously that requires lots of planning around the residences where students stay, staff that is back on campus. In terms of IT, we have some people who are in kind of a rotation basis. So all of our staff going on a rotation basis. So you kind of go, Tuesday is my day that I'm in the office.
Okay. Sure.
And the rest of the time at home.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What was how did the community come together? I guess I've got a bunch of follow-up questions. This is really interesting because unlike many other people in sort of, let's say, Europe or North America, et cetera, who had that nice summer break, right? To sort of take a step back and take a deep breath and say, okay, let's plan. And you had to do all this in stride. How's the community reacted to this? How's the student body reacting to it? The professors, et cetera?
So it's been a mixed bag, if I can call it that. I think there are obviously those people who felt completely thrown by it. And because everyone had to go home, home can be in very rural areas where you don't have internet connectivity at the best of times. I mean, our Wi-Fi is sketchy at best, and very, very expensive. So all of the universities had to kind of lobby government and get a lot of the mobile service providers to zero rate our institutional sites. So it doesn't cost anything to go onto the LMS.
Wow, that's a huge win.
Yeah. So that was, and it's only for a specific period of time. Obviously, the mobile internet providers are not going to give you something for free for always. And that meant that the universities also had to then buy mobile data for the students. So every month students get like 10 gigs of data for daytime and 20 for nighttime, so they can download some of the content overnight, and laptops as well. There was a big drive where laptops were then given to students to be able to use at home. But it's still...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We had a little...
Yeah.
You've taken me to that where my next question was what the technology privilege, I guess, in your part of the world is you just said, so you had to provide mobile access, you gave some data, but then you also had to provide actually the hardware as well. So do most people, we know that most people have a phone, right?
Yeah.
You felt that everybody needed a laptop as well, or?
So students could ask for whether or not they wanted a laptop, and then it gets added to their student accounts. So kind of on loan at this stage. The mobile access, because Moodle Mobile is so versatile in terms of what they can do, the laptops often were around the assessments and around the research that people had to be able to do. But there's definitely a group of students, I would say, that prefer to just use their mobile devices that they have.
Super cool. And final question about this particular aspect. What's been the academic result? Have you seen like a big dip in grades, or, quality of assignments that people are able to turn in, or sort of have things remaining normal? Or
I think it depends on the setup within the modules or within the program. So depending on how the lecturer then approached it, if they tried to put paper behind glass and just take everything that they did in class and put it online, I think that's where people struggled quite a bit. In terms of assessments or exams, there were a number of regulations that we had to put in place to actually counter the stress. So the stress and anxiety of students was something that I've never seen before when it came to exam time. They had extra time just to kind of counter any technology issues or internet issues for all of the exams. So each exam had like an extra half an hour added to it. Mm-hmm. But students' anxieties were extremely high. And I think this has affected, and we don't do proctoring at all. So even without proctoring, even without proctoring, the anxiety levels are quite intense for students.
How did you detect it? How did you detect that? Was that, you were monitoring chat rooms, or you had forums, or you had a dedicated sort of mental health service, or how are you able to say, wow, this is an issue?
Yeah, so it's a combination of, we have these business continuity committees, different groups. So you have one for assessment, one for online learning, one for finance, that type of thing. And when everyone gets together and they start bringing in information from the different sectors, you start hearing the same story over and over. But we also saw it on our service desk, so the end user support. Students and parents and grandparents and boyfriends and girlfriends all calling in kind of in a state of panic. Really, it was, we had to get all hands on deck. We had to get people who aren't even usually on the service desk to kind of come online. We used to have four full-time staff Monday to Friday for the support desk. And we now have 8, but we also run until 10 o'clock at night, as well as on a Saturday.
Mm. And is that panic around, I don't know how to use the technology, or I'm not sure where to log into my class, or I just don't understand the material, or I need, where does,
It was more about the technology. It was more about just, I think, generalized stress. Because I mean, we know that high stakes exams in education research will tell you that people are naturally more anxious. But just the fact that it was in a different format, the fact that they had to then upload, and you have 1,500 students trying to submit at the same time. And so there's a few second delay, but that was then this cause for panic. So then people would refresh the whole time, which then obviously causes additional spikes on the database on our side.
wow. So I want to pivot for a second in this conversation about you.
Yes.
You're a physiotherapist.
Yes.
That's your
Yes.
training.
Qualified.
That's where you, how the heck did you become the manager of IT for a large university? From that, where did that come from? Tell me that story.
So this is it's an interesting, I think, path that I've taken. So I qualified as a physiotherapist, and I worked in the community as a physiotherapist for the Department of Health for a while. And then I went into private practice. And while I was there, I started doing clinical training for students from the universities in Cape Town, and found it quite interesting. And then my husband lost his job. So I had to take on kind of extra things. We had to figure things out. Um, and I then started working at Stellenbosch, that was 2008, on contract, working kind of straddling between my practice and working at the university. And when I started lecturing, I then also did an MPhil in health sciences education, and really started feeling quite passionate about the fact that if we want our graduates to be the best that they can be, then we need to make sure that their level of education is the best it can be, which means we need to have qualified and trained academic staff. Um, so from there, I then went into faculty development, and almost organically started focusing quite a bit on e-learning within faculty development and within my research. And by accident, became the team manager for the end user support team.
But I mean,
Yeah.
but did you do you just have a fascination for technology? I mean, the arc that you're putting on the table there, it's very, as you say, it's organic, it evolved. You saw opportunity, you fulfilled that opportunity. Do you have a passion for technology? Is this something that you have grown to love, or were you always kind of like one of those closet geeks, or what?
So I wouldn't say closet geek. I think my dad was always the kind, my dad's a pastor, so we moved around quite a lot growing up. And the very first thing we did with whichever house we moved into was we unpacked the TV and the stereo and the whatever it was. And that was the first thing that we did. Any technology that was out there, I mean, I think it was 1997 when my dad was like one of the few people who had a cell phone,
Oh,
and so
wow.
it was always, it was always kind of these things of, it was interesting to be able to learn something new. And when I started reading around research and doing research using technology, it just fascinated me how useful and harmful it can be, if not used correctly.
Wow. So tell me about the experience that you've now had. You're the conduit between the academic world and the technology world. I love that conversation. It's a place that I live all the time as well, in both my family and throughout all of the careers that I've had. Um, what are some common fails and some common successes that you've seen, not only in this time right now, but over time, about putting putting classes online? When a lecturer says, or an instructor says, I'm ready to go online, what are the things they need to ask themselves in order to do that, and what do they usually fail at?
Yeah, so my advice has always been the first time someone says, I want to use this tool, because they see something and it's really cool at a conference or somewhere else. And they say, I want to use this. And I always say, take a step back. What is it you want your students to be able to do? And I think that if you don't start with that question, then you can end up going down a road, almost down a rabbit hole of just taking things because it looks cool, but it doesn't add value to the education of the student or to facilitating learning. Because I think that's what we should be there for, is to facilitate learning. And so I think some of the common mistakes, as I mentioned earlier, this paper behind glass idea, throw a PDF of your PowerPoint up online and you say you're doing e-learning, or have a forum discussion available and that's e-learning, when actually it's a lot more complex than that. So I ask people, if you were teaching a class on cake baking and you only had a microwave, why would you expect a student to be able to bake a cake in the oven? You need to use what you have available that is going to add value to what you're doing, and make sure that you then tailor what your curriculum to actually work with the tools, if it's going to enhance it. If it isn't going to enhance it, stick to pen and paper, stick to face, but don't just throw technology at something and expect it's going to revolutionize everything.
Take me to the other side of that conversation, because I know, especially in this time, what is happening in many institutions is that agendas are being driven by the technology faculty, right? They're like, hey, here's what we've got,
Yeah.
these cool tools. Of course, why aren't you using Zoom and chat and Teams and blah, blah, blah. What's your conversation on the tech side with them? Is it the same thing? Hey, if the tool isn't fit for purpose, or do we really need all these things? What's that conversation like?
Yeah. So it's been almost frustrating in a way. And I think I've seen this quite a bit on kind of the EdTech Twitter scene, where people are saying, we've been saying these things for 10 years and no one listened to us then. and now suddenly,
Preach. Yes.
everyone is like, oh, but this is interesting. Why didn't you tell me about this? And I said, I ran so many workshops on, creating interactive learning environments. And people just weren't interested because there wasn't a drive for it. But in terms of your question, I think we have financial constraints, which we have to keep in mind. And we have systems in place. So Moodle is our LMS. We use Adobe Connect for streaming with a very limited number of seats. And we've also now integrated Teams into Moodle. And that was something that was going to happen over a year from now, and kind of happened in May.
There's nothing like the 1 week rollout for a 1 year project.
Oh, that was interesting. But it means that, so everyone wanted to use Zoom because that's what they saw online. They said, no, let's use Zoom. And we said, but we have Adobe Connect and we have Teams. Why do you want to add another thing, which is going to have a cost implication for the university in terms of licensing? And so we give them a package of tools. It doesn't mean that they are stuck with it, but especially because of the cost for our students, we have to think about I've seen people talk about it as a social justice issue. In terms of accessibility for students, if you are creating an environment like where we have our LMS is 0 rated, Adobe Connect is 0 rated, Teams is not. Because that would be a whole other story.
For everybody who doesn't understand, what does that mean, 0 rated? What does that mean?
So 0 rated means you can actually access the site and not use any mobile data.
Oh, sorry, 0 rated. Okay, sure. Of course, that makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So our conversations with people were around the fact that if you are going to be an advisor to lecturers on how to design for online, it's about creating data light content. So something that uses as little data as possible. do not try and lecture for 45 minutes or 2 hours in a kind of a live stream setting, because no one is going to have that kind of data available to them, or that kind of connectivity that is stable. You can't say a class of 1,000 students is going to have that, especially in our context. So we try to make sure that the LMS Moodle offers you enough that you'd be able to actually create a very engaging environment to learn in, that you can download everything for offline access, or offline syncing on the mobile app, and just kind of, this is your toolkit. So
Right.
let's see what you can do with that. And there will be some, we know of one class that has 1,700 students in economic and management sciences.
Wow.
And they created a Microsoft team, which is linked to their Moodle course, where they've got channels for different groups of students. And they put tutors in those channels to kind of have chats back and forth and ask for help. And that to me is a nice way of creating an ecosystem. Because, we can't expect everyone just to use one set of tools, but we can advise them around what is going to be the cheapest, what is going to create the most engagement, and what's going to be the most accessible.
One of the things that I love so much about this conversation right now is how calm you are. You are just so, you know what? This is just how it is. What has been a complete surprise to you? Like, is there anything that's really just stood out? Wow, I did not see this coming at all. This is really an aha for me.
That's a good question. I think what has been a big surprise for me is how little technology actually assists students with disabilities. Because my assumption, and what we had been talking about, we have, a disability office that assists students in transcribing notes, kind of creating transcripts of audio, so that it can be done with a screen reader for the student. And we now have students that are saying, but I can't. I just cannot continue with my course in this format. I don't have a sign language interpreter available. And even that, we tried doing kind of Teams recordings where you have video on for the sign language interpreter and for the lecturer. And there's too much of a lag for it to actually be useful to the students.
Wow, that is intense.
So you have students kind of always getting their content after the fact. Where you have a sign language interpreter watching, like we are now, actually playing out the lecture on the one screen, and then with their hands on the other screen, creating a separate video for the sign language. And it's to me, it is, that should be more of a priority than doing things like getting full campus rollout of proctoring, or full campus rollout of 24/7 live streaming.
Sure.
Because I think it was Michelle that you interviewed, that had spoken about that group of students. It's not fair that we are completely just excluding this one group of students.
Right. Michelle Moore from My Learning Consultant.
Yes.
She was on the show a little while ago. Yeah. So she's the accessibility conversation with her, with Gavin Hendrick at the eLearning Success Summit, with many of the people that we're talking with right now. Who's the gentleman, Brightspace, whose name is, he's going to kill me. His name is escaping me right now. D2L. Yeah. That is a huge issue. I'm glad that you really, that has been your, the data point that you've seen is, technology is there and it's ready, but it's also generally built by people of ability. It's built by people who assume abilities of others. And therefore the consideration of, hey, how do I make this accessible to someone who cannot either see or hear or respond or just interact with this device, right? A computer or a phone. It's been a low priority. So it's interesting kind of flipping back to that that same technology department say, hey, look, I've been teaching you how to do these classes. I've been doing all this. I've been showing you how to do, and yet that has been a very low priority consideration.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for that.
I think I have been almost warmed by the effort that I see people putting in. It has been amazing to see how people have kind of jumped in and worked 12, 16-hour days to make sure everything was ready. We had IT staff who were working kind of US hours to be able to be online with tech support on that side. We've had people really go above and beyond. And I think that now we have kind of settled into a rhythm, which is probably why I'm calm. I think if you spoke to me in April, it would have been a different story.
I got you at the right time.
Yeah, no, we've settled into a rhythm. And so I think this is a good time for us to now start thinking about, the university is starting with a hybrid learning project, which was actually approved a while ago already. And this might be a good time to start learning lessons and finding that middle ground for, we can't just go back to the way things were, but we can't also stay the way we are. So where is that middle ground in a way that our staff doesn't burn out, but that our students are fully supported and all of our students are fully supported.
And so that you've just taken me beautifully to my last question for you. What's your prediction there? What do you, if we look 6 months down the line in your crystal ball, are you still, kind of working from your home and you're negotiating mobile rates and those kinds of things, or have you returned to blended learning and et cetera? Or what do you think it looks like? Is this normal now? Are we in normal?
I've started to almost hate is a strong word, really strongly dislike the words new normal.
That's why I didn't say new. This is normal now.
Yeah. In March, everyone's emails were in these uncertain times, and signed off with stay safe. I think we are definitely going to go back to campus. There will be, and I've been speaking to friends of mine who work at other institutions in the country as well, who are saying, look, they've had to do so much work. It was so much effort to create engaging online content and interaction that they can't just throw it away. So I think that there will definitely be more of a blend. I sincerely hope that in 6 months' time, that the universities and government in general will see that we can't get by with kind of 2 people in a department for an entire university to be able to support learning technologies. Because it's like for years we've been talking about e-assessment, and I've been saying it's not e-assessment, it's just assessment. We don't e-shop, we don't e-bank. We just bank and we just shop. So, hopefully this is going to lead us into a space, I think in the next 6 months, a space where there is a priority placed on really supporting the support staff and recognizing that, and I think this is probably where my background helps a bit, understanding both the academic side and now the IT side as well, is recognizing that there needs to be a balance in terms of the priorities, where the financial priorities are. Because we always kind of sideline the support side, and we don't think about the fact that people need to feel supported. And that, I think, has been one of the biggest needs throughout this, is that your academic, professional, and support services have been overworked and anxious themselves about the pandemic, but have been there and putting it all on the line to try and support the academics who are supporting the students.
Lianne, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us today. Fantastic conversation. I learned a lot. I wish you all the luck, and I hope that we get to speak with you again sometime in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.